Julia Roberts has spent more than 3 decades making the world believe in happy endings. Her unforgettable smile became one of Hollywood's most recognizable symbols, convincing millions that she was living a life as perfect as the characters she played on screen. She became America's sweetheart, one of the highest-paid actresses in history, admired by fans across the globe. But behind that famous smile was a story few people truly understood. At 58, Julia Roberts' life isn't the fairy tale many imagined. It's the story of a woman who achieved extraordinary success while quietly carrying heartbreak that never really disappeared. Julia Fiona Roberts was born on October 28, 1967, in Smyrna, Georgia. She grew up in a family that loved the performing arts. Her father, Walter Grady Roberts, ran an acting school in Atlanta, while her mother, Betty Lou Berdemus, worked as an actress and acting coach. From the very beginning, creativity surrounded Julia, planting the seeds for the career that would one day change her life forever. But behind the scenes, her childhood was far from peaceful. The warmth of the theater couldn't protect her family from painful realities. And soon, everything would change. When Julia was just 4 years old, her parents divorced. Only 8 months later, her mother remarried Michael Moats, a man much younger than herself. Years later, people close to the family described him as someone the children feared. Betty Lou herself would eventually call that marriage the greatest mistake of her life, later filing for divorce on the grounds of cruelty after more than a decade together. The marriage also brought Julia a half-sister, Nancy Moats, a relationship that would later become one of the most heartbreaking chapters of her life. Julia has rarely spoken publicly about those difficult years, leaving many to wonder what she endured behind closed doors. Then came a tragedy that changed everything. When Julia was only 10 years old, her father died from throat cancer at the age of 43. Losing a parent at such a young age leaves scars that often remain hidden for decades. Walter had inspired his children to dream, encouraging creativity and imagination. Suddenly, that guiding presence was gone. While the world would later see Julia's confidence and dazzling smile, few realized that one of the most important people in her life had disappeared before she even reached middle school. But despite the pain, something remarkable was beginning to take shape. By the late 1980s, Julia Roberts was becoming impossible to ignore. Her performances in Mystic Pizza and Steel Magnolias revealed a rare talent that instantly connected with audiences. Critics praised her emotional honesty, and before turning 23, she earned an Academy Award nomination for Best Supporting Actress. Yet that was only the beginning. Everything changed in 1990 when Pretty Woman became a worldwide sensation. The romantic comedy earned more than $460 million worldwide on a modest budget and transformed Julia into one of the biggest movie stars on Earth almost overnight. Suddenly, every studio wanted her. Magazine covers featured her everywhere. Audiences fell in love with her warmth, her laugh, and especially that unforgettable smile. Films like My Best Friend's Wedding, Notting Hill, and Runaway Bride cemented her status as Hollywood's queen of romantic comedies. To millions of fans, Julia Roberts seemed to have the perfect life. But fame often hides struggles that cameras never capture. Behind every glamorous premiere and red carpet appearance, personal challenges were quietly growing. And one devastating event would soon remind the world that even Hollywood's brightest stars are not immune to heartbreak. In 1990, Julia became engaged to actor Kiefer Sutherland. They were young, successful, and constantly described as Hollywood's golden couple. Their wedding attracted enormous media attention, with reporters eagerly counting down to the big day. Then, just 3 days before the ceremony, everything collapsed. Kiefer called off the wedding, leaving Julia heartbroken in front of the entire world. The humiliation wasn't private. Every newspaper and television show covered the story. Guests had already made plans. Preparations were complete. Then, in a single moment, the fairy tale vanished. Julia later admitted it was one of the loneliest periods of her life. Thankfully, time eventually brought healing. In 2002, Julia married cinematographer Danny Moder, whom she had met while working on a film. Unlike many relationships in Hollywood, theirs was built away from constant media attention. Danny preferred a quiet life behind the camera rather than in front of it. Together they created the stable family Julia had always longed for. They welcomed twins Hazel and Phineas in 2004, followed by their son Henry in 2007. It seemed that after years of public heartbreak, Julia had finally found lasting happiness. But life had another unimaginable tragedy waiting just around the corner. February 2014 became one of the darkest months Julia Roberts would ever experience. Her half-sister, Nancy Moats, was found dead in Los Angeles at the age of 37. Authorities later ruled the cause of death as a drug overdose, and Nancy had left behind a suicide note. What made the situation even more painful was that the note blamed members of her own family, including Julia, for contributing to her depression. Nancy had often struggled with living in the shadow of her famous sister. Although the truth behind family relationships is rarely simple, those written accusations became impossible to erase. Imagine reading words that blame you for someone else's suffering. Whether fair or not, Julia was forced to carry that emotional burden while grieving an unimaginable loss. Just 20 days later, she honored a previously scheduled interview, where reporters noticed the pain written across her face. Fighting back tears, Julia quietly admitted, "It is just heartbreak." There were no dramatic speeches or attempts to defend herself. She simply acknowledged the overwhelming grief and tried to move forward one day at a time. But even before the family had fully recovered, another devastating blow arrived. Julia's mother, Betty Lou, had been diagnosed with lung cancer. During her illness, she moved into Julia and Danny's home in Malibu, where she spent her final months surrounded by family and grandchildren. Julia wanted her mother close, choosing love and togetherness over anything else. Then, on February 19, 2015, only 1 year after Nancy's death, Betty Lou passed away at the age of 80. Julia skipped that year's Academy Awards because there were simply more important things than Hollywood celebrations. Losing a sister under such painful circumstances and then losing her mother only months later created a weight that few people could truly understand. Even after becoming one of the most successful actresses in history, Julia discovered something many celebrities eventually learn. Fame cannot protect anyone from grief. It cannot stop illness. It cannot repair broken families. And it certainly cannot erase painful memories. Yet despite carrying those losses, Julia continued moving forward, balancing her career with raising her children and protecting the private life she had worked so hard to build. Professionally, Julia Roberts continued making history. In 2000, she won the Academy Award for Best Actress for her unforgettable performance in Erin Brockovich. That same year, she became the first woman in Hollywood to earn $20 million for a single film, changing the industry's expectations forever. Rather than relying only on romantic comedies, she challenged herself with more complex roles in films like Ocean's 11, Closer, and Duplicity, proving she was far more than America's sweetheart. She was one of the finest actresses of her generation. Still, the years that followed brought new challenges. Hollywood constantly questioned whether her popularity was fading, with critics wondering if her era had ended. Julia refused to chase trends or desperately seek attention. Instead, she chose meaningful projects and focused on what mattered most, her family. Away from movie sets, she embraced a surprisingly ordinary lifestyle in Malibu. She cooked, read books, spent time with her children, and found peace in simple routines that had nothing to do with fame. But perhaps that's exactly what she had been searching for all along. Today, at 58, Julia Roberts' story looks very different from the glamorous image the public first embraced decades ago. She remains happily married to Danny Moder, while their children have grown into young adults. Yet the losses she experienced remain part of who she is. The father she lost as a little girl. The heartbreaking death of her half-sister. The passing of her beloved mother only a year later. Those moments shaped her far more deeply than awards, money, or celebrity ever could. Friends have noticed that Julia now speaks about grief with a quiet acceptance instead of overwhelming sadness. She once shared a simple photograph wearing a bracelet engraved with her mother's name, a small but powerful reminder that love never truly disappears. Sometimes grief doesn't become smaller. Instead, we simply learn how to carry it. Perhaps that's why Julia Roberts has remained so deeply loved for so many years. It isn't just because of her famous smile. It's because, beneath that smile, audiences have always sensed something genuine. There has always been a quiet strength behind the warmth, a resilience that couldn't be manufactured for the cameras. She has endured heartbreak, public humiliation, painful family conflict, unimaginable loss, and the pressures of worldwide fame, yet she continues choosing hope over bitterness. Julia Roberts didn't simply become America's sweetheart because she made people laugh or fall in love on screen. She earned that place because her life reminds us that even those who seem happiest often carry invisible burdens. Her story isn't really about Hollywood success or box office records. It's about surviving loss, protecting the people you love, and finding the courage to keep smiling even when life gives you every reason not to. Behind one of the world's most famous smiles stands a woman whose greatest achievement was never fame, it was resilience.